"You must be on the wrong floor." Rebecca Collins said it with a smile so thin it looked practiced, the kind of smile people used when they wanted insult to sound like policy. The words stopped Malcolm Hayes 2 steps beyond the private elevator bank on the 48th floor of Caldwell Meridian Group, where the morning light spilled through glass walls and turned the marble lobby into something cold, bright, and expensive. Behind the reception desk, a young assistant froze with one hand above the keyboard. Near the coffee station, 2 analysts stopped speaking mid-sentence. A printer clicked once in the corner, then fell silent as if even the machine understood that the room had changed. Malcolm stood tall beneath the white ceiling lights, 6 feet 2 inches of quiet control, dressed in a dark gray 3-piece business suit, a crisp light blue shirt, and a deep burgundy tie that rested neatly against his vest. His hair was cropped short, his beard carefully groomed, and in his right hand he carried an old brown leather briefcase with softened corners, polished by age more than money. It was the first thing Rebecca noticed. Not the cut of his suit, not the calm in his eyes, not the way he stood like a man who had already walked through harder rooms and survived them. She noticed the briefcase, the temporary visitor badge clipped to his lapel, and the fact that no assistant had hurried ahead of him to announce his name. Rebecca Collins was in her mid-30s, blonde hair pinned into a sleek professional twist, navy business suit cleanly tailored, white blouse bright beneath the lapels. She managed the executive floor with the precision of someone who believed control was a form of virtue. Every meeting began on time. Every chair faced the right direction. Every water bottle label pointed outward. Every visitor was either expected, escorted, or removed from view before anyone important felt discomfort. This morning mattered more than most. Caldwell Meridian was preparing to announce its new chief executive after a secret restructuring that had kept half the company awake and the other half afraid. Rebecca had been given the schedule, the room setup, and one instruction from the board office: keep the floor flawless. She had not been given a photograph. She had only seen a name printed on a restricted briefing packet. Malcolm Hayes. 9 o'clock. Board introduction. Chief Executive Officer. Now, at 8:17, Malcolm Hayes stood in front of her, but she saw only a black man arriving alone with no escort and a briefcase that looked older than the furniture. "I have a meeting with the board," Malcolm said. His voice was low, steady, and without apology. Rebecca let out a short breath that almost became a laugh. "Of course you do." The sentence floated through the lobby, soft and cruel. A few employees looked down at their screens. One junior staffer, a young black man near the copy room, stopped sorting folders and held them closer to his chest. Malcolm saw him. He saw the lowered eyes, the tense jaw, the familiar calculation of someone deciding whether silence was safer than truth. Malcolm had seen that look before in conference rooms from Chicago to Boston, in hotel lobbies, in client dinners where people spoke to the person beside him first, assuming he was there to carry documents rather than sign them. He did not react. He simply looked at Rebecca, then passed her to the wall of framed portraits near the boardroom entrance. Every former chief executive smiled from behind polished glass. Older, pale, certain, each face lit like a tradition no one had questioned aloud. "May I ask your name?" Malcolm said. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "You may not need it." "Then may I ask you to check the board schedule?" "I do not need to check a schedule to recognize when someone does not belong on this floor." The room went very still. Not silent exactly. Still. The kind of stillness that arrives when people understand the truth of what has been said, even if the person speaking pretends not to. Malcolm's fingers tightened once around the handle of the briefcase. Inside it was a folded letter from his father, written on lined paper years before his father passed, the paper worn from being carried across cities and seasons. "Son, never let a room tell you who you are before your purpose has a chance to speak." Malcolm felt the weight of those words now, warm beneath the cold lights. He had come early on purpose. No welcome committee, no press, no chairman beside him. He wanted to see the company before the company dressed itself up for him. He wanted to know how people were treated when no one thought power was watching. Rebecca lifted her chin, mistaking his quiet for uncertainty. "There is a facilities entrance downstairs if you are here for maintenance. Deliveries go through the freight lobby. Job applicants check in on 42. This is executive access only." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, not angry, not embarrassed, only awake. Would you have explained all that? He asked. If I had walked in with someone saying my title before I spoke. The question landed harder than any raised voice could have. The assistant behind the desk stopped breathing for a second. The young man near the copy room looked up. Rebecca's face tightened, and for the first time, her polished smile disappeared. Do not turn this into something it is not. Malcolm glanced again at the portraits, then at the temporary badge on his lapel, then back to her. I think this floor already did that. Rebecca heard his answer and felt the lobby tilt away from her by half an inch, not enough for anyone else to name, but enough for her to feel the balance change. She was used to people accepting her corrections. Vendors apologized before she finished speaking. Assistants straightened papers when she glanced at them. Junior analysts lowered their voices when her heels touched the marble. But Malcolm Hayes had not apologized. He had not asked for permission to exist in front of her. He had simply stood there, calm and exact, asking questions that made the room look at itself. Behind the reception desk, the assistant's nameplate read Nora Blake. Nora kept her eyes on her monitor, but the small pulse moving at the base of her throat betrayed how closely she was listening. Near the copy room, the young black staffer held the folders against his chest with both hands. His badge read Jordan Ellis, executive intern. Malcolm noticed the title and the tension beneath it. He remembered being that age, carrying files. Down hallways where every closed door seemed to ask whether he belonged. Your badge does not show board access, Rebecca said, rebuilding her voice into something procedural. It shows visitor access. Visitors do not question floor protocol. Malcolm looked down at the badge clipped to his lapel. It was temporary, printed in black letters by the downstairs lobby system after he had deliberately declined an executive escort. Hayes. No title. No department. No warning. Exactly what he had requested. Then follow the protocol, he said. Call the board office. Ask whether Malcolm Hayes is expected. Rebecca gave him a thin smile. People who belong here do not need to announce themselves this aggressively. I announced an appointment. You implied importance. No, Malcolm said. You assumed the absence of it. The sentence struck the lobby quietly, but everyone seemed to feel it. A man at the coffee station lowered his cup without drinking. Nora's hand hovered near the phone. Jordan's eyes flickered up and stayed there 1 second longer than before. Rebecca saw that, and irritation moved through her expression like a shadow. This was what she disliked most, not disorder itself, but disorder with an audience. The morning had been arranged to perfection before 7 o'clock. She had personally inspected the boardroom, checked the temperature twice, adjusted the blinds so the sunlight would not hit the chairman's seat, and made sure the name card for the incoming chief executive remained face down until the official introduction. She had survived 10 years at Caldwell Meridian by becoming indispensable to people who never asked how much pressure it took to keep their world smooth. Her precision had started as ambition, then hardened into identity. If she controlled the room, she could not be dismissed from it. If she decided who belonged, no one could decide she did not. That old fear hid beneath her polished suit and professional smile, but it did not make the words she spoke any less cruel. Mr. Hayes, she said, making his name sound borrowed. I do not know what point you are trying to prove, but this floor is not available for personal statements. Malcolm's gaze did not leave hers. Respect should not require a title. A quiet breath passed through the lobby. For a moment, Rebecca had no answer. Then she turned sharply toward Nora. Call security. Nora looked up. Miss Collins, should I check the board schedule first? The question came out soft, almost frightened, but it landed like a crack in glass. Rebecca's face went still. I gave you an instruction. Nora looked at Malcolm, then at the restricted calendar glowing faintly on her screen. Her fingers moved toward the keyboard, then stopped. The conflict in her hands was visible. Obedience had muscle memory. So did conscience, though it often arrived late and trembling. Malcolm saw the struggle and felt something inside him tighten, not with anger, but with recognition. The problem was not only Rebecca. It was the training of everyone around her to make her comfort more important than the truth. It is all right, Malcolm said to Nora. Do what you believe is correct. Rebecca turned back to him, eyes sharpened. You do not give instructions to my staff. No, Malcolm said. I give permission when fear has taken too much. Jordan shifted near the copy room, one folder sliding slightly out of place. On its cover, stamped in small blue letters, were the words Leadership Transition Packet. Rebecca did not notice. Malcolm did. He also saw the top sheet beneath the plastic cover, and the name printed across it in bold type. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. The truth was already in the room. It had simply not been allowed to speak yet. Nora picked up the phone, her voice low as she called the security desk. The lobby returned to stillness, but now the stillness had a pulse. Malcolm set his briefcase gently on the marble beside his shoes, as if he were settling something sacred rather than waiting to be removed. The old leather creaked softly. Inside, his father's letter rested against the signed transition agreement that had saved Caldwell Meridian from collapse. Rebecca watched the briefcase touch the floor and mistook the gesture for surrender. Malcolm knew better. Sometimes power did not enter a room by taking space. Sometimes it entered by refusing to be rushed out of it. The call lasted less than 20 seconds, but it stretched across the lobby as if the whole floor had been asked to hold its breath. Nora spoke quietly into the receiver, giving the security desk the floor number, the location, and Rebecca's words without adding her own. Unauthorized visitor. Executive lobby. Refusing to leave. Each phrase landed softer than an accusation and harder than a mistake. Malcolm listened to the language form around him, familiar and efficient, the kind of language that made suspicion sound neutral. He had heard versions of it before in places with polished doors and smiling receptionists, where the problem was never named directly because naming it would require courage. Rebecca stood with one hand resting against her tablet, the other at her side, fingers perfectly still. She looked composed again, or close enough to convince anyone who needed her to be. Yet beneath the surface, something was moving. Malcolm could see it in the way her eyes avoided the folder in Jordan's arms, in the way she kept her chin lifted a fraction too high, in the way she had begun to speak less to him and more to the room. For everyone's awareness, she said, her voice crisp, this is exactly why executive access protocols exist. No one answered. The lobby lights reflected in the marble, turning every shoe, every chair leg, every silent body into a faint duplicate beneath the floor. Malcolm glanced down and saw himself there. Dark suit, straight shoulders, old briefcase beside him. A man reflected clearly by stone and still questioned by people. Rebecca continued, we cannot allow anyone to wander into a restricted area and claim importance because they say the right words. Malcolm looked at her. The right words were my name and my appointment. You are still here because you refused to follow simple direction. No, he said. I am still here because no one has checked the truth. That sentence found Nora first. Her eyes moved to the restricted calendar on her monitor, then to the phone still in her hand. Her mouth tightened, not with defiance, but with the pain of knowing how close the answer was and how dangerous. It felt to reach for it. Jordan stood near the copy room with the transition packet pressed to his chest, and Malcolm watched the young man's thumb slide over the printed name on the folder as if touching it could make reality stronger. Rebecca had built her career on controlling this exact kind of moment. She knew how to keep tension from reaching the boardroom. She knew how to turn questions into interruptions, interruptions into incidents, and incidents into someone else's problem before anyone above her had to be bothered. It had made her valuable. It had made her feared. It had also made her blind. Years earlier, when she was an assistant on the 32nd floor, she had promised herself she would never again be the nervous woman standing outside a conference room with coffee in her hand while executives forgot her name. She had worked herself into authority with long nights, perfect notes, and a memory sharp enough to save powerful people from their own carelessness. But she had confused survival with superiority. The more she rose, the more she measured others by how close they stood to power. A title meant patience. A badge meant courtesy. An escort meant importance. Without those things, a person became a disruption to be managed. Malcolm had arrived without the signal she trusted, and so she had placed him beneath the room before she knew who he was. The elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed faintly, but the doors did not open yet. The sound was enough to make everyone look. Rebecca's face tightened with relief. Malcolm did not turn. He kept his eyes on her, not to intimidate, but to witness the final seconds before consequences entered with uniforms. You still have time, he said. Rebecca blinked. For what? To check. The word was almost gentle. That gentleness unsettled her more than anger could have. I do not owe you repeated verification, she said. You owe it to the company. The company is not harmed by caution. No, Malcolm said. It is harmed when caution becomes a mask for contempt. Nora lowered the receiver slowly. No one had told her to hang up. She simply could not keep holding it. Jordan took one step forward, then stopped as if the floor itself had warned him. The folders rustled against his jacket. Rebecca heard it and turned. Jordan, return those materials to the conference room. His voice came out quiet, but clear. They are for Mr. Hayes. The room shifted. Rebecca's eyes dropped to the folder at last. Leadership Transition Packet. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. For a single second, the polished machinery behind her expression stopped working. Then the elevator doors opened, and two security officers stepped into the lobby while the truth stood in plain view between them. The two security officers stepped out of the elevator with the careful pace of people trained to enter tension without feeding it. The older one, broad-shouldered with silver at his temples, looked first at Rebecca Collins because she had placed the call. The younger one scanned the lobby, his eyes passing over Nora behind the reception desk, Jordan by the copy room, the analyst near the coffee station, and finally Malcolm Hayes standing beside the old brown briefcase on the marble floor. No one spoke for a moment. The silence had weight now, shaped by the folder in Jordan's hands and the name printed across it. Rebecca recovered first, because recovery was one of her skills. She stepped forward half a pace, her navy suit sharp beneath the white ceiling lights. Her voice tightened into policy. Officers, thank you. This individual entered the executive floor without proper escort, challenged floor protocol, and refused to leave when directed. The older officer turned to Malcolm. Sir, is that accurate? Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly, surprised that he had asked instead of acting. Malcolm did not rush to answer. He looked at the officer, then at the restricted calendar still glowing on Nora's monitor, then at the transition packet pressed against Jordan's chest. I entered through the lobby with a visitor badge issued by your building, he said. I stated that I had a board appointment at 9 o'clock. I requested verification. It was not completed. The younger officer glanced toward Rebecca. Miss Collins, was the appointment checked? Rebecca's expression remained controlled, but the question reached her pride before it reached her logic. The floor is under confidential transition protocol. We cannot open restricted board materials for anyone who walks in claiming to be important. He did not claim to be important, Jordan said. His voice surprised even him. Everyone turned. The young intern swallowed, but he did not step back. He gave his name. Rebecca looked at him with a cold warning in her eyes. Jordan, this is not your responsibility. Malcolm shifted his gaze to Jordan, and the softness in it was brief but unmistakable. Courage often arrived shaking. That did not make it less real. Nora finally pushed her chair back an inch. The sound of its wheels on the floor was small, but in that lobby it felt like a decision. Miss Collins, she said, her voice careful. The transition schedule does list a Malcolm Hayes for the 9 o'clock board introduction. Rebecca turned toward her. Nora, one word. A whole history of consequences behind it. Nora's face paled, but she kept going. The title is restricted, but the appointment is there. The older officer looked back at Malcolm's visitor badge, then at Jordan's folder. Mr. Hayes, do you have identification? Malcolm reached slowly into his jacket and handed over his driver's license and a slim executive access card still sealed in its temporary sleeve. He had been told the permanent credentials would be activated after the announcement, not before. Another quiet mistake of ceremony over sense. The officer examined the card, then looked to Nora. Can you cross-reference this number with the board office? Nora nodded and began typing before Rebecca could stop her. The keyboard clicks moved through the room like rain beginning against glass. Malcolm stood still, his hands relaxed at his sides, the old briefcase resting near his polished shoes. He did not look victorious. He looked almost tired, not physically, but in the deeper way of a man watching a familiar pattern repeat itself in a new building with better lighting. Rebecca watched Nora type, and for the first time that morning, doubt pushed through her expression before she could hide it. Not enough to become apology. Just enough to become fear. The private elevator at the far end chimed again, lower this time, followed by the soft opening of its silver doors. 3 people stepped out, a tall white-haired man in a charcoal suit, a black woman in a tailored security director's uniform, and a legal counsel carrying a burgundy folder sealed with a gold clasp. The white-haired man was Charles Whitcomb, chairman of the board. Rebecca knew him instantly. Everyone did. His presence usually made the floor straighten. This time, it made the air drop. Charles stopped when he saw Malcolm standing with security between him and the boardroom. His eyes moved to the visitor badge, to the officers, to Rebecca, then to Jordan's folder. The expression on his face changed from confusion to disbelief so quickly that even Rebecca could not pretend she missed it. "Mr. Hayes," Charles said, his voice low and strained, "we have been waiting upstairs." The older security officer looked down once more at the identification in his hand, then back at Malcolm with sudden recognition. Nora's typing stopped. Jordan lowered the transition packet by an inch. Rebecca did not move at all. Malcolm picked up his briefcase by the worn leather handle, and in the polished marble beneath him, his reflection stood whole and steady. "I was told," he said quietly, "that I did not belong on this floor." Charles looked at Rebecca, and her name had not yet been spoken, but the room had already heard it. The name Charles Whitcomb did not need to be announced on the 48th floor. His face had hung in annual reports, investor letters, and framed charity photographs for so long that even new interns knew the shape of his authority before they knew the sound of his voice. Yet in that moment, the chairman did not look powerful. He looked unsettled, as if the perfect lobby had opened beneath him and shown the foundation he had tried not to inspect. Malcolm Hayes stood a few feet away with his old leather briefcase in hand, calm under the white ceiling lights, while the two security officers shifted into the awkward stillness of people realizing they had been called to correct the wrong man. Rebecca Collins felt every eye turned toward her, not all at once, but in waves. Nora behind the desk, Jordan by the copy room, the analysts near the coffee station, the legal counsel holding the sealed burgundy folder, the black woman in the security director's uniform, whose nameplate read Angela Price, watched Rebecca with a steady expression that offered no place to hide. Charles looked at Malcolm first. "Mr. Hayes," he said carefully, "I owe you an immediate apology for this delay." Malcolm's face did not change. "The delay is not the part that concerns me." The sentence moved through the lobby like a slow closing door. Charles nodded once, as if he already knew what was coming and deserved it. "Then tell me what does." Malcolm looked toward Rebecca, then to the wall of portraits near the boardroom entrance, those polished faces smiling from a past that had mistaken repetition for excellence. "A company can survive a delayed meeting," Malcolm said. "It cannot survive a culture where verification is optional, dignity is conditional, and people become problems when their appearance does not match someone else's expectation." No one spoke. The older security officer still held Malcolm's identification and executive access card. He looked down at them, embarrassed, then stepped forward and handed them back with both hands. "Mr. Hayes, I apologize. We should have verified before responding, as if removal was the answer." Malcolm accepted the cards. "Thank you for saying that." The younger officer lowered his eyes. Rebecca remained motionless, hands clasped tightly around her tablet. She wanted to explain. She could feel explanations lining up behind her teeth, neat and professional. Confidential floor. Transition protocol. No photograph provided. Visitor badge unclear. Security risk. Each one had a shape, and each one might have sounded reasonable in a report. But none of them could erase the moment she had looked at Malcolm and decided he did not belong before she knew who he was. Charles turned to Nora. "Was the appointment visible?" Nora swallowed. "Yes, sir." The title was restricted, but the appointment was visible. "Was it checked before security was called?" Nora's eyes flicked once. Toward Rebecca. "No, sir." Rebecca finally spoke. "Chairman Whitcomb, I was protecting the floor." Her voice was controlled, but it had lost the clean edge that once made people obey quickly. Malcolm looked at her, and that look was worse than accusation because it carried disappointment instead of anger. Charles asked, "From what?" Rebecca opened her mouth. The lobby waited. She looked at Malcolm's suit, his briefcase, his visitor badge, Jordan's folder, Nora's screen, the security officers, the portraits, the marble under her shoes. For the first time, there was no polished word strong enough to carry the truth without exposing her. "From a possible breach," she said at last, but even she heard how weak it sounded. Malcolm did not raise his voice. "No, you were protecting an image." Rebecca's eyes sharpened for a second, wounded by the accuracy. Malcolm continued. "You were protecting a version of this floor where people who look familiar are trusted quickly, and people who do not are questioned until they either shrink or disappear." Jordan's grip loosened on the folders. Nora looked down, blinking hard. Angela Price shifted her stance, not in surprise, but in recognition. Charles exhaled slowly through his nose. The private elevator doors remained open behind him, waiting like the company itself, caught between where it had been and where it was being forced to go. "The boardroom is ready," Charles said quietly. Malcolm glanced toward the door. "Then let it wait one more minute." He turned to Jordan. "May I see that packet?" Jordan stepped forward immediately, then caught himself and walked with care. He handed the leadership transition packet to Malcolm. Their eyes met for half a second. Malcolm saw fear there, yes, but also relief, the strange relief of watching truth survive contact with power. "Thank you, Jordan." The young man nodded, almost unable to speak. Malcolm opened the packet and removed the top page. There it was in clean black type. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Caldwell Meridian Group. He held it so the lobby could see, not to humiliate Rebecca, but to make the hidden visible. Then he placed the page on the reception counter beside Nora's keyboard. "This was always available," he said. "So the question is not whether the truth existed. The question is why no one was allowed to reach for it." Rebecca's fingers weakened around the tablet. For the first time that morning, her posture changed. Not collapse. Not yet. But the first visible bend in a woman who had built her life around never being seen as wrong. Malcolm picked up his briefcase again and looked toward the boardroom. "Now," he said, "we can begin with the real agenda." The boardroom doors opened with a soft hydraulic breath, and the sound seemed too gentle for what had just happened outside. Inside, the long walnut table waited under a row of warm pendant lights, each place set with a glass of water, a leather folder, and a pen placed at the same angle. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched beneath a pale morning sky, streets moving far below in silver lines, yellow cabs, delivery trucks, people crossing corners with coffee cups and winter coats, all of them unaware that on the 48th floor, a company was being forced to look at its own reflection. Malcolm Hayes entered first, carrying the old brown briefcase in his right hand and the transition packet in his left. Charles Whitcomb walked slightly behind him, not from weakness, but because the room understood now who was leading. Rebecca Collins followed last. Her heels crossed from marble to carpet, and the softer sound made her feel suddenly less certain of her body, less protected by the sharp rhythm that usually announced her authority before she spoke. Around the table, board members began to rise, prepared for polite introduction, then paused when they saw the faces entering the room. The legal counsel closed the burgundy folder slowly. Angela Price remained near the glass wall, hands folded in front of her, watching the room with calm attention. Malcolm placed the transition packet at the head of the table, but did not sit. He set his briefcase beside the chair with care, the worn leather touching the carpet in a small sound that seemed more honest than everything polished around it. For one quiet moment, he looked at the face-down name card, waiting before the chief executive chair. He did not turn it over. Not yet. Instead, he looked through the glass wall toward the lobby, where Nora still sat behind the reception desk and Jordan stood near the copy room, both pretending not to watch and failing. The silence was no longer empty. It had texture. It carried the hum of the ventilation system, the faint buzz of lights, the distant city below, the thin scrape of Rebecca's breath when she tried to steady herself. Malcolm thought of his father's hands, rough from working in a Newark rail yard for 29 years, palms darkened by grease that soap never fully removed. He thought of his mother placing one clean shirt after another across the back of a kitchen chair before his college interviews, telling him that people might misread him, but they did not get to rewrite him. He thought of all the rooms where he had learned to be excellent without becoming bitter, patient without becoming small, kind without becoming weak. That was the line people often misunderstood. Kindness was not surrender. It was discipline. It was choosing not to become the wound someone tried to give you. Charles cleared his throat. "The board is ready, Mr. Hayes." Malcolm turned from the glass. "I am not sure the company is." The words settled across the table, and no one reached for a pen. Rebecca stood near the door, her navy suit perfect, her blonde hair smooth, her white blouse bright under the lights. But every perfect detail now seemed unable to protect her from the plain truth of the morning. Malcolm looked at the board members one by one. "Before I accept this chair in front of you, I need to know whether this company wants a chief executive officer who only improves its numbers, or one who changes the way power moves through this building? A woman near the window lowered her eyes. An older man adjusted his glasses without speaking. Charles looked down at his folded hands. Malcolm continued, his voice quiet enough that everyone had to listen closely. Outside this room, a staff member was afraid to check a schedule she had access to. An intern was afraid to speak a truth printed in his own hands. Security was called. Before verification was completed, a manager trusted her assumption faster than her procedure. That is not one incident. That is a system revealing itself in miniature. Rebecca's eyes filled, but no tear fell. Malcolm saw the struggle and did not rescue her from it. The most dangerous rooms are not the ones where cruelty shouts, he said. They are the rooms where everyone hears it and keeps working. Through the glass, Nora looked down at her keyboard. Jordan stood still, his folder lowered at his side. The city light shifted across the boardroom table, touching the name card at the head like a question waiting to be answered. Malcolm finally reached forward and turned it over. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. The black letters faced the room. He placed one hand lightly on the back of the chair, but did not sit. Now, he said, tell me who here is ready to stop pretending the floor was clean before I arrived. No one answered Malcolm Hayes at first, because the question had reached a place where corporate language had no prepared response. Around the walnut table, board members looked at one another with the guarded discomfort of people who had spent years approving culture reports without walking the hallways those reports described. The name card at the head of the table now faced them openly. Malcolm. No one answered Malcolm Hayes at first, because the question had reached a place where corporate language had no prepared response. Around the walnut table, board members looked at one another with the guarded discomfort of people who had spent years approving culture reports without walking the hallways those reports described. The name card at the head of the table now faced them openly. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, black letters on thick white stock, simple and impossible to ignore. Yet Malcolm still did not sit. He stood behind the chair with one hand resting lightly on the leather back, his dark gray suit sharp beneath the warm pendant lights, his face calm in a way that gave the room no permission to escape into panic. Rebecca Collins stood near the glass wall, where she could see both the boardroom and the lobby beyond it. Outside, Nora Blake remained at the reception desk with her shoulders drawn inward, and Jordan Ellis stood near the copy room holding the lowered transition packet. Rebecca saw them through the glass, and for the first time that morning, they did not look like staff positioned inside her system. They looked like witnesses. Charles Whitcomb finally spoke, his voice low. Mr. Hayes, the board brought you here because you restructured the debt, preserved thousands of jobs, and gave this company a second chance when our lenders were preparing to walk away. Malcolm turned his eyes toward him. Numbers gave you time. People decide whether time becomes change. Angela Price, still standing near the door, nodded almost imperceptibly. Charles looked at Rebecca. Miss Collins, you were responsible for executive floor access this morning. Rebecca swallowed. Yes, sir. You had the schedule. Yes, sir. You had staff with access to verify his appointment. Yes, sir. And you chose removal before verification. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The boardroom was so quiet that the faint hum of the city through the windows seemed to rise from below the floor. Malcolm stepped away from the chair and walked slowly toward the glass wall. His reflection moved beside Rebecca's reflection, his posture steady, hers stiff and pale. He looked out at Nora and Jordan, then back to Rebecca. I want you to answer something without procedure around it, he said. Rebecca turned toward him. Her blue eyes were wet now, though she held herself with the last pieces of control she had left. Yes, Mr. Hayes. Malcolm's voice remained even. If I had entered this floor with Chairman Whitcomb beside me, with my title announced before my name, with this same suit and this same face, would you have mocked me? The question struck harder than accusation because it left no room for the story she had been telling herself. Rebecca looked at the table, then at the name card, then through the glass at Jordan. She remembered his voice saying the packet was for Mr. Hayes. She remembered Nora asking to check the schedule. She remembered the way Malcolm had not raised his voice when she tried to reduce him to a problem. She remembered her own smile when she said he must be on the wrong floor, and suddenly the memory felt uglier than the moment itself. No, she whispered. Malcolm did not move. Charles closed his eyes briefly. A board member near the window lowered her head. Rebecca drew a careful breath and forced the truth to come out whole. No, I would not have mocked you if I had known you were the new chief executive officer. Malcolm looked at her for one long second. Then you did not respect me. You respected the possibility that I might outrank you. Her face tightened as if the words had found the exact place she could no longer defend. Yes, she said, almost soundless. Then stronger. Yes. The admission seemed to change the air pressure in the room. It was not victory. It was exposure. Malcolm returned to the head of the table and placed his palm flat beside the name card. Not on it, not over it, beside it. This is why titles are dangerous, he said. They make weak character look professional. They teach people to bow to power and overlook humanity. I am not here to build a company that waits for a title before offering respect. He looked at Charles, then at each board member. Effective today, every access policy, complaint channel, management evaluation, and leadership promotion standard will be reviewed through one question. Does this system protect dignity when no one powerful is watching? Angela Price stepped forward. My office will assist with the review. Charles nodded. Fully authorized. Rebecca's hands trembled once at her sides. Malcolm saw it, but he did not soften the truth. Mercy without honesty would only polish the same old floor. He turned back toward her. Ms. Collins, the company will decide your role after a formal review. But right now, there is something more important than your position. Rebecca lifted her eyes. Malcolm looked through the glass toward Nora and Jordan. There are people outside this room who learned this morning that telling the truth could cost them comfort. You helped teach them that. Now you need to begin unteaching it. Rebecca stared at him, and at last the difference became clear to her. He was not trying to shame her into the ground. He was asking whether she had enough courage to stand in the truth she had created. Her breath shook, but her voice came out clear. What do you want me to do? Malcolm picked up the face-down visitor badge from where he had placed it beside the packet. He held it between two fingers, the plain word Hayes still printed without title, department, or warning. Start, he said, by apologizing to the man you thought was nobody. Rebecca Collins looked at the visitor badge in Malcolm Hayes's hand, as if the small strip of plastic had become heavier than the whole boardroom table. Hayes. No title. No department. No protection. That was the version of him she had judged, the version she had mocked, the version she had tried to remove before truth had a chance to stand upright. The room waited, but Malcolm did not press her. He simply held the badge between two fingers, calm and steady, letting her decide whether the apology would be another performance or the first honest thing she had done all morning. Rebecca turned toward the glass wall. Outside, Nora Blake sat at the reception desk with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Jordan Ellis stood near the copy room, the leadership transition packet lowered at his side, no longer hiding the name printed across it. The analysts near the coffee station had stopped pretending to work. Even the two security officers remained in the lobby, standing farther back now, respectful and quiet. Rebecca saw all of them, and then she saw herself reflected in the glass beside Malcolm. Blonde hair smooth, navy suit precise, white blouse bright, face pale with the shock of being revealed. For years, she had believed professionalism meant never bending, never admitting uncertainty, never allowing the room to see anything unpolished. But the polish had not made her fair. It had only made her harm look organized. She stepped out of the boardroom slowly. Her heels crossed the carpet, then clicked onto the marble, each sound smaller than it had been when the morning began. No one moved away from her. That almost made it harder. Fear would have given her something familiar to manage. Silence gave her only herself. She stopped in the center of the lobby where she had first blocked Malcolm's path. The same cold light shone down. The same city moved beyond the windows. The same floor reflected every face with cruel honesty. She looked at Malcolm, who had followed only to the boardroom doorway, not close enough to corner her, not far enough to make the moment private. Mr. Hayes, she began. Malcolm's voice was quiet. Not my title. Rebecca closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the apology found a different place in her throat. Malcolm, she said, careful with the name now, not because it belonged to power, but because it belonged to a person. I am sorry. He did not answer yet. She swallowed. I am sorry for looking at you and deciding you did not belong before I knew anything about you. I am sorry for making my assumptions sound like policy. I am sorry for calling security instead of checking the truth. And I am sorry for teaching the people on this floor that silence was safer than honesty. Nora's eyes filled. Jordan looked down, then back up, steadier than before. Rebecca turned slightly toward them. Nora, you asked the right question. I made you afraid to ask it again. That was wrong. Nora pressed her lips together and nodded once. Rebecca looked at Jordan. You told the truth when I tried to send you away. I am sorry I made courage feel like insubordination. Jordan's face shifted, young and guarded, but something in his shoulders loosened. Rebecca turned back to Malcolm. Her breath trembled, but she did not let the trembling become an excuse. I should not have needed your title to recognize your dignity. The words settled across the lobby, and for the first time that morning, they did not sound polished. They sounded costly. Malcolm walked toward her and stopped a few feet away. He looked not triumphant, not cruel, not pleased by her shame. He looked like a man who understood that justice without humanity could become another kind of arrogance. Thank you for telling the truth, he said. Rebecca shook her head slightly, as if the mercy made the shame sharper. Then, without being ordered, without drama, without anyone touching her, she lowered herself to one knee on the marble floor. A quiet breath moved through the lobby. Malcolm did not step forward. Charles Whitcomb did not speak. Angela Price watched carefully, making sure the act belonged to Rebecca alone. Rebecca looked up at Malcolm, her eyes wet now, her posture no longer protected by authority. This is not because you are my new boss, she said. This is because I tried to make you feel beneath me, and I need to remember that feeling from the other side. Malcolm held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, Stand up, Miss Collins. Accountability is not staying on your knees. It is what you do after you rise. Rebecca stayed still for one breath, then rose slowly. The marble beneath her reflected a woman no longer powerful in the old way, but possibly human in a new one. Malcolm handed the visitor badge to Nora. Keep this, he said. Frame it in the training room. Nora took it gently. Malcolm turned back toward the boardroom. Let it remind us that every person deserves respect before we know what to call them. Rebecca stepped aside, leaving the path open. This time, no one moved because they feared her. They moved because the truth had finally made room. 3 months later, the 48th floor of Caldwell Meridian Group no longer felt like a room holding its breath. The glass walls were still spotless, the marble still reflected the Manhattan morning in pale silver light, and the boardroom table still carried water glasses aligned with careful precision. But something beneath the surface had changed. The air felt warmer now, not because the thermostat had been raised, but because people no longer moved through the lobby as if one mistake could erase them. Near the reception desk, a framed visitor badge hung inside a simple black case beneath a brass plaque that read respect comes before recognition. The badge was plain, almost ordinary, with only one word printed across it. Hayes. No title, no department, no warning. Every new employee saw it during orientation before they learned the executive floor map, before they received their access card, before anyone explained where the conference rooms were. Nora Blake now led that part of training herself. She stood beside the frame that morning with a small group of new hires, her voice calm and clear as she explained that verification was policy, but dignity was not optional. She did not mention shame. She did not need to. The badge did that silently. Across the lobby, Jordan Ellis stood near the copy room, no longer clutching folders against his chest. He had been promoted into the Leadership Development Program after Malcolm Hayes asked every department to identify people who showed courage before anyone rewarded them for it. Jordan still carried himself with humility, but his eyes no longer dropped when senior executives passed. That morning, he handed a folder to a nervous intern and said, "Ask the question before fear answers it for you." Malcolm heard the sentence as he stepped out of the private elevator, dressed in his dark gray three-piece suit, light blue shirt, and deep burgundy tie, the old brown leather briefcase in his right hand. For a moment, he stayed where he was and watched the floor move without performing for him. A courier in a rain jacket crossed the lobby carrying a package. Nora stood to greet him by name after checking the delivery slip. A facilities employee rolled a cart past the coffee station, and an analyst stepped aside with a quiet thank you instead of pretending not to see him. Small things, almost invisible things. The kind of things that decided whether a company had changed or had only changed its language. Rebecca Collins emerged from the boardroom, holding a stack of printed feedback reports. Her blonde hair was still smooth, her navy suit still precise, her white blouse still crisp, but her posture no longer seemed built to block the hallway. She paused when she saw Malcolm, then walked toward him with measured steps. There was still shame in her face sometimes, not the kind that begged to be comforted, but the kind that kept a person honest. "Good morning, Malcolm," she said. The first time she had used his name without a title, it had sounded like confession. Now it sounded like respect. "Good morning, Rebecca." She handed him the reports. The first, dignity. "Audit is complete. We included anonymous staff comments, contractor feedback, reception logs, security response reviews, and visitor experience notes." Malcolm opened the folder. "All of them." Rebecca nodded. "All of them, including the ones that make leadership uncomfortable." He looked at her for a quiet second. "Especially those," he said. "Especially those," she answered. Through the glass wall, Charles Whitcomb sat in the boardroom with the directors, waiting not with impatience, but with something closer to humility. Angela Price stood beside a new access policy display, speaking with two security supervisors about verification steps that protected both safety and respect. Nothing looked dramatic enough for a public statement. No cameras waited. No applause rose. But the floor had learned a new rhythm. People looked at one another before they looked at badges. They checked facts before they repeated assumptions. They corrected mistakes before pride turned them into harm. Rebecca glanced toward the framed badge, then back at Malcolm. "I still remember that morning every time I walked past it." Malcolm followed her gaze. "Good," he said gently. "Memory is useful when it becomes responsibility." She lowered her eyes, then nodded. "It has." Malcolm closed the folder and touched the handle of his father's briefcase, feeling the worn leather beneath his fingers, the old softness shaped by years of work, sacrifice, and quiet faith. For a moment, the lobby seemed to hold all of it at once. His father's hands, his mother's pressed shirts, the rooms that had underestimated him, the people who had found courage in the space his silence created, and the woman who had fallen to her knees not to worship power, but to confront what power had made of her. The boardroom doors opened with a soft breath. Rebecca stepped aside, not like someone yielding to authority, but like someone making room for dignity to pass. Malcolm walked forward. Behind him, Nora continued her training. Jordan laughed softly with the new intern. Angela turned toward the security desk. Rebecca picked up a paper that had slipped from her stack and placed it carefully on the reception counter for the person who had dropped it. Morning light spread across the marble, clean and quiet, and this time no one on that floor had to become important before being treated as human.